Across the world, people have their housing costs taken away as much as half of their income. Have you ever thought of trying to change that? The good news is there is a way. House hacking is real, and we are here to show you how other people just like you have made it happen. Welcome to the House Hacking Podcast. And here is your host, house hacking expert, Andrew Kerr.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. We really hope you've been enjoying the show so far and here of season 1 of the House Hacking Podcast. You know, we started our show with the launch episode featuring Coach Chad Carson. And on that episode, we talked about the idea of house hacking. We sort of got to hear his story of getting started in real estate. And then we also covered 5 of the 6 main styles of house hacking. We had the room rental house hacking with Tiffany. Then we went on and showed the income suite house hacking with Amanda. Then we talked about the accessory dwelling unit house hacking with Cammie. We had the case study about the small multifamily house hacking with David. Then we went into this really unique style of house hacking on the last episode, which is the work-provided house hacking with Sorka. Then, as I mentioned also back in that season opener, we're going to save the live-in flip style of house hacking for a future season. Now, we've got 14 episodes left in season 1. And what we're going to do for these last 14 episodes is give you more case studies on those first 5 styles of house hacking. We've got more examples of individuals house hacking solo, folks house hacking with their partner, and we're going to feature more individuals house hacking with a family. Since our first room rental house hack case study was with Tiffany, a female, today we're going to do another room rental style house hacking case study, but feature it with a single male. I am really excited today. I've got Adam joining us. Adam is a 31-year-old engineer. He's married and has 2 young kids. He started off his real estate investing journey with house hacking, and he now owns 12 properties. I'm excited to have him on and really learn about how he gets started. So at this point, Adam, welcome on. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. I love what you're doing here. Happy to help.
Thank you. So could you start off maybe with just sort of a high-level summary of how old were you? Were you married? Were you single? The timing period? Just a high-level summary of that first house hack that you did.
Sure. I was just graduated 2010 with a civil engineering degree. And I was like, all right, whole goal was to just graduate, get a job. And after about a year, I had some money. I was like, why don't I just buy a house? I kind of call it an accidental house hack. I didn't have any intention of actually keeping it from a long term. I didn't even know what house hacking was. So I was like, oh, buy a house, me and my college buddies. And then once they started paying my mortgage and I realized what was going on, I was like, oh, this is actually something.
Awesome. I feel like that's the way a lot of folks get started with house hacking is they just start doing something and then all of a sudden they realize like, hey, this is working out well. And now house hacking has really gotten so big where it's pretty well defined. It'd be like, oh yeah, I was actually doing house hacking, just didn't realize it at the time.
Yep, that's right.
Well, let's really sort of start at the beginning. This is 2010. You just finished graduating civil engineer. You said you had a year of sort of saving up some money. So you were already off on a good financial track, it sounds like, where you knew not to spend all of your money.
Yeah, I definitely made some of the uh-ohs, bought a new truck. You know, when you get a new job and you finally don't have to, you actually start making some income. I did about everything you could wrong to start off with, where it's like, oh yeah, I'll get a new truck. You got all this income, you got nowhere to go. You just start blowing through it. Luckily, the one thing that I did do was buy this twin home that was close to a university campus here that I ended up buying as my first home. It was kind of against my girlfriend's advice at that time. She's like, you don't want a house here. Why don't you get like a nice house that you actually want to live in for a long time? I was like, I just want me and my college buddies to party.
Yes. So you say twin house. Is that actually a duplex or just a style of house in your area?
Yeah, they call them twin homes here, where it kind of looks like a duplex, but yeah, they're technically separate. The only agreement between the two is if you're going to change your roof because they're connected, you have to go in so the two don't look the same. But for the most part, they're 2 separate homes, parcels, everything.
So 2 homes under one roof, but you only owned one side.
Yep, with like a fire rated wall between the 2.
Okay, great. Yeah, sort of townhouse style. And what city was this in?
This is in Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Ah, okay, great. So you bought this home about a year after you graduate. Do you remember roughly what you bought it for?
Yeah, I bought it for 143,000, and I used back then they did the 80-10-10s.
Oh yeah,
You probably remember those, Andrew, but I was just remembering that as I was kind of thinking about it, I forgot that was a thing where, if you're normally getting into it, you can do the FHA or, other things, but I forgot back then I had 10% saved up and I wanted to get rid of the PMI. So I did the 80-10-10 where you 80% loan, 10% another loan, and then just to get out of the PMI, and then I paid that other 10% off early.
Yeah, they don't seem to do those very often, but back then I had actually started, my first career was in the mortgage industry, and we did a ton of those at a time where it's like 80% first mortgage, then you do either a fixed rate second mortgage or a line of credit for 5, 10, 15%, and then you would put down the else, and it was just a good way to get around the mortgage insurance. So
yeah, and I thought, well, if I could, I thought that it was at the time was a terrible investment because it didn't even appraise out for the 143,000 that I bought it for. And I was like, oh, great, this is terrible. It came in, something couple grand or $5,000 less than that. And so at the time, it looked like 2012. You're overpaying for this house. I'm like, whatever. You can kind of negotiate back and forth, and now it's my single greatest asset that I probably have.
Oh, awesome. So yeah, you bought it and you're like, oh my goodness, this could be a financial mistake, but you just still went ahead and did it anyways. Were you able to negotiate the price down at all after you got the appraisal back, or did you end up sort of paying a little bit over appraised value?
Yeah, I wish I had known about a thing like Bigger Pockets or books or other things. It was just kind of blind faith going through it and figuring it out without much recourse. And so I ended up not wanting to lose the house. So I think I came in more than what I split the seller for. Nowadays, I realize that you have a little bit more leverage, especially if they're trying to sell, on negotiating if it doesn't appraise out. Just say, hey, look, it's not worth that much.
Yeah, you almost had that fear of missing out on it. We're like, oh my goodness, I put this time into it. I don't want to lose it over this couple grand. Let's meet in the middle. But yeah, now more seasoned real estate investor, you're like, oh, I've got a good way to reduce the price even lower now.
That's right. Yep.
Cool. So you bought it, and now, step it back really quick. So before you bought the home, were you still living on campus in a dorm, or were you renting a place? What was your housing situation like?
Yeah, I was single with a girlfriend. I was living in an apartment on campus because after I graduated, we just stayed in our year-long lease. And then when it came time, we renewed just because we didn't have any other place to really go. We didn't want to go off campus quite yet. And then after that year came up was kind of enough time for me to save up something and start thinking about buying the house.
And was it you and your girlfriend or just a couple buddies that you were living together?
It was me and 3 other buddies. Yeah. So the girlfriend wasn't with me at that time.
And then how much were you paying for rent for that?
So rent, I'll maybe break down a couple of things. So the original 80% mortgage with principal PITI was about $800. The other 10%, I think, was like another $150. And then I got $400 a month rent from each of them. So I was $1,200. So I was clearing a couple hundred less, anything going for tax or for repairs and maintenance, but just overall basically living free.
Awesome. So then before you bought the house, the place you were renting, what were you spending on rent?
Ooh, that's a good question. I was probably paying close to that $400 a month plus utilities.
So something similar, dividing up the utilities between the 4 of you guys and paying 4-ish. So you went from $400 a month out of pocket plus some utilities to having a mortgage with the first second at $950, and that included your taxes and insurance, you said. And here you are bringing in $1,200 a month.
That's right.
Yeah, that's awesome. You're making money every single month and completely eliminated your housing costs.
That's right. So you go from paying $400 and some change to now making close to $300 and some change. It's like a $700 swing, and it was at the time I didn't realize it until after a few months, and I was like, oh, and not only am I paying down my loan, but the home is appreciating, and I was like, this is phenomenal.
Yeah, you're getting the home appreciation. You're getting the tax write-offs for the interest deduction. That was back before the tax law change in 2018 with the higher deduction limit. So you had that. You had a mortgage paid down, and you're living rent-free. This was like win, 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 and win.
If I had to argue what's been my greatest financial decision today, it's been a house hack. Although my engineering job is paid off salary-wise more, what I have now done with that property and how I've leveraged it in the future, from 7 years ago, it just happens to have appreciated extremely well. Now that kind of fuels all the rest of it. So I would agree. If everybody could start off instead of like the first thing you did after you graduate was consider if you could do a house hack, or even if you could do it beforehand, I would say go for it.
I agree with you 100%, and that's why I started this podcast. So thank you for that involuntary plug. So thinking back, you had the 3 roommates when you're living in this house. I know you said they're all paying rent. What'd you do for the utilities? Did you cover that, or did you split it between the 4 of you as well?
We ended up just splitting it as well.
Okay, so your utility costs were then pretty cheap when you're dividing across 4 people.
Yep. So I've kind of seen it go both ways, where you just kind of charge them whatever the rent would be. This way, even in future rentals, having them have a little bit of skin in the game with heat or other things, even though they're people that I knew, eventually they turned into people I didn't know, which turned a little bit scary, which we'll probably talk about later. But just having them have a little bit of skin in the game with water or heat is I always like having that.
Oh yeah, it's like, if I got to pay a portion of the bill, I'm not going to like make it super cool or super hot, or be like, I'll just go throw on a sweatshirt instead of turning up the heat. And same thing is like, well, I'm not going to take that hour-long shower because I got to pay for that bill. So I agree with you 100% on that one.
Yeah.
All right, so you've got the property, you've got your roommates. How'd you find your roommates? Were they all friends, or did you do any marketing to get those roommates?
Yeah, they happened to be all the people I was living with on campus as the 3 roommates, with 4 of us in the 3-bed. It was only a 3-bedroom place at the time. We were still living like college people were trying to skip by on cost. So yeah, they all came with. And
then the twin, the side you were living in and owning, was that a 4-bedroom or was it still 3-bedroom?
Nope, it was a 4-bedroom.
Oh, so
we had somebody living in the living room, so he actually got a bedroom now.
Oh, so he got the upgrade.
Yeah, that's right.
So how does this conversation go with your friends? Was it just all of a sudden one day like, oh, I bought a house, or when our lease is up, I'm moving in. Would you like to come? And you got to pay $400, or like, how did that all go?
A lot of my friends were teachers. And with me being the engineer, I was probably pulling down the most out of anybody from a salary perspective. And then from a bank being able to loan from me and realizing that I wanted to stay there long term, they were at the drop of a hat would go to whatever teaching job they had. And since I lucked out and got a good civil engineering job in town, I knew that I was staying. So they didn't want to pull the trigger on it, but they were all for, if we could get a house, this would be way better than living in this apartment.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so you have them as your roommates, you're collecting rent. It was an easy transition to get them over. How'd you actually collect the rent from them?
I don't know if there was Venmo and PayPal back then. I think half of them were cash, half of them were, if they banked the same amount, just kind of transferred it. That part I'm a little bit hazy on, but for the most part, it was nothing too difficult on my end.
Did you ever have any challenges collecting rents from your friends, or was it like, oh, Adam, he's my buddy, I'll just, wait a week or two to pay him? Or had everyone sort of moved on to the professional jobs as teachers and had consistent paychecks, or did you have any challenges at that point?
Yeah, so there definitely was challenges. When I first moved in, it was 3 of my really good buddies. Then they took a job, I didn't have them on a lease or anything. They were just living there till whenever. And they're like, all right, now I'm leaving. I was like, well, wait a second, I got an extra room now. What should I do? So then I'd have, a friend be like, oh, I know this guy who needs a spot. And then he would kind of move in. And then after another person moved out, was like, oh, the friend of the friend recommends another friend who needs a spot. And then it took 3 degrees of freedom to get a bad roommate.
Okay. So started off with the close friends, then the acquaintances, and then it was like, all right, the bad guy finally slept in. And
that's right.
Did you have to do any eviction, or was he just not a good roommate and didn't pay consistently?
Yeah, I don't know if I don't think I actually evicted him. I think I just filed a small claims suit against him, where it was like, he just seemed like a normal guy, paid, a couple months, and then he's like, oh yeah, I'll get it to you, whatever. And I was like pretty naive, and I didn't think that people ever just didn't pay rent. And so then eventually, after you've been there for a couple months, it's like, all right, this is it, no more freeloaded, and you're just out. So then he left, and I was like, are you planning on paying any of the back rent that you lived here for 3 or 4 months free? And without getting much of an answer, I was like, all right, I kind of want to take him to small claims court, filed that, but of course never got anything.
Yeah, sometimes it's tough to win in small claims. So I know you said when you first got your buddies that came in, there was no leases. They were just sort of month to month. As that started to move through those different circles of friends, did you start to use leases at all?
Nope, not until I moved out of that home and moved in some new true rentals, or turned it into a true rental without me living in there, did I actually have a signed lease.
And then what about deposits? Did you take deposits, or is it like, oh, it's my friends, no deposits, I'm not worried about it?
Yeah, you're right. No deposits.
I think that happens to a lot of us, especially anyone that does the house hack with the room rental. That's how I did my first one as well, was house hack, townhouse, room rental. It's like, oh, the buddy can come in, no deposits. Just give me the rent, the first week of the month. It'll be good. Don't worry about signing leases, any of that fun stuff.
Yeah, just things you don't even really think about of covering yourself or having any sort of written agreement in place.
I know. I'm always shocked how I didn't get in more trouble or open myself up to more liability at that point when it was so loose. All right, so you've had these roommates, you sort of cycled through. How long was it from when you bought it and moved in with your three buddies to when you moved out?
3 years. So I bought it in 2012 and then moved out in 2015.
Okay. And over that time period, did you have any big expenses, maintenance expenses, damage for like a tree fall through the roof, any of those sort of things?
There was a big one. The blower on the AC started getting funky. And because the house was built in 1997 and it was, along that 12 to 15 years, I just opted to replace the whole AC furnace combo. They kind of try to package that together. And so I ended up doing that. That was by far the biggest expense, which was probably $5,000 up here for what it cost to put all that in. But for the most part, other than that, there wasn't like siding or roof or fridge or oven or other things that went wrong.
Just real minor stuff other than that big thing.
Yep.
So earlier you said when you graduated with your civil engineering degree, you went out and you bought the new truck, you blew some money. When you started going from paying rent to having no housing costs and bringing in a little bit of money, what'd you do with that sort of at that time, which would have been equivalent to this windfall every single month? Did you blow it? Did you save it? What was your thought process?
It all went into paying off the truck, which wasn't, terrible, but the decision to get it and the price that I got it at probably wasn't great. And traveling, doing some other things that were a little bit fun, but for the most part, I didn't have any like save 10% or anything like that. It was, let's just pay off the truck debt because I knew that one was there. So by the time we moved, I had that all paid off.
Yeah, so you at least did something positive with it, right? Start knocking out some debt.
Yeah, I didn't buy more debt. That was probably the good thing. I didn't get a boat or something like that.
Yeah. If you can avoid more debt and pay down debt, that's a good place to go. All right, so you've had this 3 years. One big thing came up. Roommates were generally pretty good until you got with that one bad guy. Overall, it doesn't sound like it was that bad of an experience.
Nope. The whole house hack, like I said, that I have such a great feeling for it that if I had realized what I had done, and then once I learned from some of my friends who did that almost religiously, where they would live in one for, I don't even know the exact terminology of it because I'm not an expert. I kind of just accidentally fell into it, but they would just go from one to the next, and they get all these great terms and loans, little down, and they keep running through it. So I just thought it was phenomenal. It certainly helped me out. Yeah.
So then why'd you decide to move out? What was your thinking at that point? Why'd you decide to make a change?
We got married.
That'll do it, right? That'll do it.
Yeah, big life event. I figure it's usually marriage or a kid, so it wasn't that I got married. So we got married, but then we knew that we were going to start a family, and it was like, well, we're kind of in the college spot. My wife and I were like, well, maybe we don't want to be here long term. So then we made what I would call another probably dumb decision. We bought our forever home that we lived in for 2 years.
So did your wife ever live with you in that first house hack, or you guys always had your separate places and then decided to go buy your forever dream home after you got married?
No, she after she got married, she moved in, and it was just us for probably 7 months.
And while you're dating, what was her impressions of what you were doing with this? I own this house. I'm renting it out to all these different guys. Was this like, oh, you need to grow up and stop being, like your college days? Or was she like, oh, yeah, he's got the good job. He owns a property already, and it's not costing him anything. What were her thoughts of all this?
Yeah, initially it was, well, this isn't really a home to her. Her vision of probably all of us of what we've grown up for, on what we get accustomed to, on what you call a home, is probably like this nice like home that our parents had after they've worked for 30 or 40 years and what you grew up in.
Yeah.
And I realize that everybody's situation is a little bit different, but you're kind of putting yourself in their position at age 50 or 60 with you at age 20. You're like, oh, I should be able to just get this, attached 2-stall garage with this huge fence and 4 bedrooms as a 21-year-old. And that's not exactly how it works on what we were doing. So she was more like, well, let's just get a home that that would be more of a home type. And I was like, I just want something with a bunch of bedrooms.
I think it's so interesting that you say that, because the whole time I was investing, I rarely ever actually owned my own primary residence. I spent a lot of time living in my rentals or having these weird house hacking situations. And sort of through my 20s, it was my mom was, well, why don't you just buy a real home like everyone else? It was that typical sort of thing of like, you're doing something different and that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do this thing over here. And then it wasn't until one day my mom was talking to her friend who was a realtor, and all of a sudden the light bulb just switched for her, where it was like her friend was like, you do know your son owns more property than like 90% of people. And my mom was like, oh, I can actually be proud about this now. So yeah, it changed.
That's right. I like that.
And then same challenge when me and my wife started dating. We lived in separate places. And then when we were moving to New Orleans together, she knew I was in the real estate. It was always my thing. And I said, look, let's rent a place so we can figure out the part of town that we like. But I want to do a house hack. It would have been my third house hack or our first house hack together. And we had that sort of rub where she was always looking for, this is my forever home. And I was, this is an investment. And I really remember we went into the tile store. All of a sudden she disappeared. I'm into like $1 a square foot tile, and she's over in the $20 a square foot tile section.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So you guys got married, you moved into your dream home, and then sold it after 2 years. It sounds like there's a little bit of a story here.
Yeah. I mean, you think you can plan out. I think that's what I've learned is you think you can plan out for a long period, but really looking out anything more than 5 years is probably about as long as you want to go.
Yeah.
At least in my interim, just with job changes, especially when we didn't have kids. And, if you're going to get married or if you have a job or you realize you don't like where you're living, there's so much that can change in that time period. So we bought this, just huge square footage, way bigger than we needed. And I went from living, almost rent free to now paying a mortgage that was triple of what I previously had. And so then I was like, oh boy, what did we just do here? So that's when I got into like Dave Ramsey and was thinking about, okay, now I got to pay off this whole house. And then, things kind of changed from there once we got a new job offer in a different city. And then I actually kept that one as a rent to own.
Oh, that's really interesting way. So at that point, then when you moved to the different city, you had two properties, your first twin home that you had bought, and now this forever home that's now a rental.
Yeah. My thought was, this is way more expensive than what anybody's ever going to pay in rent.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like the traditional layout of what a rental would be. It was like a really nice home in a really nice neighborhood where you don't get like the same rent to price, like the 1% rule, or however you want to look at different rent to gross price ratios. But I was like, you know what, let's just try it, and offered it as, well, you can rent it for a couple of years with the idea that they're going to buy it because they didn't have the right credit to close on it then. And that's kind of where it went. Did
they end up buying it?
They're still in there.
Oh, they're still in there paying. So what are they paying for rent versus your mortgage cost on there?
That one's pretty slim. I'm paying a mortgage of like $1,900 and they're renting it for $2,200.
Gotcha. So you got a little bit of room in there, but if some maintenance issues come up or a big CapEx come up, it's going to eat that cash flow up pretty quick.
So when I learned about lease options or rent to own, I put the maintenance and repair under a certain value on them.
Oh, that's smart.
As the leasee. And you have to get a little bit tricky with state and city century code on what you can and can't ask them to do. But that's where I've gone a little bit more now outside of house hacking, which is for another story. But that's how I kind of got into that game.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that. So you're breaking even on this property. In good months, you're making a little bit of money. And then what were you getting for rent when you moved out of the first property that you bought?
I didn't do it very well. We moved out in January, which in Grand Forks, North Dakota, where it's -20 for a high, not a good time to try to fill it as a rental.
Oh yeah. Did it sit empty for a couple of months?
It did. So we thought like, oh, this is what we could probably get. And then when it was empty for a full month, I was like, oh, well, now I'm paying 2 mortgages. So I was like, oh, great. So I just slashed the price to, I think it was like, they got it for like $1,150 or $1,150. So I was getting $1,200 plus, me renting there, and I slashed it all the way down to that. The people who walked in there, they're like, I'll sign a lease right now if you give it to me free. It was that.
So they got lucky. They knew the situation they're walking into. They're like, hey, this is a good deal at this price.
It now rents out for $1,750 currently.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. So now you still got that. Have you refinanced the mortgage since then, or are you still paying the $950 between the first and the second mortgage?
So right now, yeah, the 10's paid off. So I still have about $800 mortgage on there. But right now I have, about 100,000 equity position in there. So I have a line of credit around 50 or 60K that I'm then using to put down as my down payments for my next, or for my, as I continue to grow my portfolio here as my slush fund for real estate properties.
Wait, so the property's appreciated enough, and now you're getting even higher rent where it's still covering all the costs. You're making a little bit of money, and now you got this equity line that you can tap into to go buy future properties.
That single greatest investment I've ever made by far.
I see now why you alluded to that earlier, where it's like one of the best financial decisions that you made, because you just keep like leveraging it over and over again to help you grow your position financially.
And part of it is luck. If you think about in 2012 to now, just general appreciation. We're a little bit isolated here in North Dakota, where if the whole market tanks, we kind of just do our own thing because we have oil money.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice. We don't go up by anything more than 3.5%, and we don't go up less than anything at 2.5%. It's basically 3% appreciation per year. But just with that, it's kind of rock steady. But just 7 years of paying off principal and letting it appreciate, it's just, you don't realize how fun it is every year that goes by. Just time is your best friend.
Yeah, especially as the mortgage goes on, more and more of that payment actually goes towards principal. So then it starts accelerating even more.
Yep. Yeah, it's exciting.
So it sounds like you made a lot of good financial decisions, and you haven't been blowing money if you are all of a sudden at 12 properties. So give me, sort of a good summary of how'd you go from your first home to your dream home that turned into a rental to now you're at 12 properties. And what's your housing situation like now? Are you now in sort of a permanent goods home, not house hacking, I'm guessing, with the wife and the kids?
Yep. So I'll try to run through them pretty quick. So, we got that first one, did the other one. We bought another one in Grand Forks as just a pure rental. This one, we figured out that it's much better to buy a property and not have it vacant. So we actually had friends. They're like, hey, if you buy a house for me, I'll rent it. Oh. Which then I already had somebody lined up as an investment property. So we did that. And I started telling people about what I was doing. So then I formed in with a partner so I could have less cash in to do more deals. So that was in 2017. We formed an LLC. And once we started doing, then we did, our goal was 2 a year, and we're averaging now about 4.5.
And are you still taking the same model of finding the tenants before you buy the property?
Yep. That's our new niche. Is we'll have somebody go pick out a home on the MLS that they want to eventually own, but they're either an entrepreneur or they have poor credit. So then we buy it for them. They sign a lease agreement with the option to buy it for a 2 to 5 year period. And then we just basically buy that home for them. We close on it and they move in the next day.
That is amazing. Are they giving you any sort of deposit or money that you can use for closing costs, or what's that look like on their end then to get into one of these properties?
So the terminology that I use in rent to own is either a lease with an option to buy or a true contract for deed or a land contract. So if it's a lease with an option, there's maybe $3 or $4 grand that they put down. If it's a contract for deed, we typically ask for 5% down, which can be our medium household is about 220,000 here. So they'd be bringing, close to 10 grand as a deposit if we're doing a contract for deed, which I then have in my hand prior to even closing on the property. It's contingent upon me buying the property for them.
Yep.
But that's our current model now.
That seems to be working really well for the two of you then.
Yeah. The problem is we're growing too fast and the banks don't want to loan us money is our current struggle. So
yeah, that tends to happen.
Yep.
And then, so are you just living off the cash flow now that you're making from these properties, or you still have your civil engineer job?
Yep. Still have the civil engineering. The idea was we were going to invest every single dollar of profit until we had enough properties where it replaced both me and my business partner's full-time income. And at that point, then you just pull the trigger and you're like, oh, I think we made it. But until then, if some housing market was to crash, or my wife has a pretty large security gland where I would have probably jumped ship long, maybe a month or tomorrow, I realized that with 2 young kids, a wife, probably makes sense to stay in the job, at least for now, doing that. But the intent is we could possibly do there. I do enjoy being an engineer. So it's just kind of an added benefit of having this at 31 years old.
Well, I think that's a smart way to do it, especially, only being 31, let that real estate money keep, compounding and keep rolling it and keep reinvesting it. And that'll just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you can live a comfortable lifestyle off your civil engineer job that you don't hate. Maybe you don't completely love it, but you're like, hey, I like this job. I can keep doing this, provide security for my family, and now building this giant real estate nest egg for the future.
Yeah, the struggle with me is once you do your first one, you get hooked.
I know, it's so addicting.
It's like a drug. Like, there's so many fears of like, oh, what if this? What if they do that? And once you've done an eviction, once you've done repairs, once you kind of understand the system, you're like, well, hold on a second. I could do this for a year, still live in it, all the benefits of that. And then afterwards, with our model of trying to not have property managers and still be able to sell it, like with, minimal hours per week, you're like, man, this thing's like my average dollar per hour of what I'm getting paid to actually keep these properties with the appreciation pay down and rent. It's just extraordinary that I was like, I can't afford not to do more.
Yeah, definitely. Now, do you have any like big financial pictures you're trying to get to or goals? I know you said you want your real estate sort of empire to be able to offset or cover or replace the salary that both you and your partner have in your normal jobs. I mean, I know right now, sort of in the personal finance community, this idea of financial independence or FIRE is really big. Mm-hmm. Do you have any of those goals out there, or is it sort of your big goal right now is just to get to where you could leave your normal job and have enough from your real estate?
It's definitely, I'm currently in that, but I'm starting to see something a little bit larger where I like the idea of being financially independent. Like, that is just awesome. Nobody can fire me or tell me one way or another. I can give to whoever I want. The next level then is going to be, okay, what does Adam truly called to do? And how can I provide the most value in the world? Whether that's getting paid for it or volunteering or whatever. So that's where I see the next level. And me and a non-business friend both set a goal to be able to donate $1 million a year as a ambitious financial goal.
That is a pretty amazing goal to have. It's not like this, I want to make 2, 3, 4, 5 million a year and have the private jet. Well, you might still have some of that out there. It's, I want to be able to give away $1 million a year. That is amazing.
Thank you. That one drives me. I realize that's a long goal, but it's one that pulls me.
No, I think we actually have more in common than I think either of us realized when we first started talking. So I used to be in the mortgage industry, and then I had a big career change and started working in the nonprofit industry. And that's why I decided to go really heavy in real estate. Was I love the nonprofit work. You just don't get paid anywhere near what you actually bring in value. And I was like, I'd love to still keep doing this. But I also, I like to fly business class when we go to Europe. I try to do it via travel hacking and credit card churning, but we like a little more comfortable of a lifestyle. We don't want to have to worry about things. So real estate investing has been able to do that. And one of the goals that I have, me and my wife, we always keep going back and forth of like, should you actually quit the nonprofit work, go really heavy, all in real estate for 5 years, and then you can go back to the nonprofit work and donate even more money. So my sort of short-term goal is to raise $25 million for charity. When I last looked up the number, I was about 17, 18 million. So I think once I get to that goal of having nonprofit jobs in fundraising, using that skill set I have, and have raised 25 million for charity, then I'll decide, do I want to stay, do something else different? But yeah, I love that goal of you're wanting to give away $1 million. And here I have this goal of trying to raise this really large amount of money for charities.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I'll have to, afterwards too, we'll have to connect you with a couple people that I know of that are in that same world. You guys can probably hit it off pretty well.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So now that we're sort of wrapping up this house hacking section, I got sort of 3 final questions for this part. What the first one is, looking back, and I feel like you probably already touched on this a couple times, what do you think your biggest sort of success is with the house hacking project that you did?
The fact that I pulled the trigger, actually did it in a time of uncertainty was great. And I'll still iterate it. It's been the single greatest financial decision I've made to date.
Awesome. Is your wife on board with the real estate? That's a question I actually didn't ask. I'll sort of cut this in here. Is what is her thoughts now where, you're up to 12 properties, you got a partner, you formed this LLC. What's her impressions and thoughts on it all?
First of all, at the house hack, it was kind of like, I would have done something a little bit differently. When we wanted to keep that as a rental, fought me tooth and nail for about 6 months. Like, it was to the point of, what do you mean you didn't read like all these? Then I found Bigger Pockets after I'd lived into a couple years, and I started reading all the books on it, and I was, wide-eyed, ambitious. I was like, this is the way to do it. She's like, there's going to be tenants in there. That's not us. So she fought it for a long time to now it's there's a no like and trust model to it now, so where she doesn't even know we're closing on 2 properties next week, and she couldn't care less, but she is on board.
Yeah, she's on board. It's your little world. Yeah, that's the way my wife is some of the times. All right, so the second question here for this part is, what was your sort of biggest challenge, or what would you look at as, your biggest failure during the house hack period, where if you could go back and change it or do it differently, what would you do?
I think I would have done it with a little bit more intentionality. If you know that you're getting into one, I kind of accidentally got into it and it happened to pay off. But if you could have built some intentionality of like, hey, we're going to do this and then we're going to do that, to how it fits into your overall plan in life, as opposed to just kind of reacting to things that happen to go, because it could have gone poorly and I would have maybe never got into real estate. But if I had intentionally had a plan of what I was going to do more thoroughly and probably known more about the process and the pros and cons, so that I could have educated myself, it kind of goes hand in hand, because that was definitely a con. But by that, it was kind of baptism by fire, because I was doing it all. I didn't have the knowledge of anybody else. And I learned firsthand a lot of these lessons that I now take with me.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it's not only with house hacking, but if you're just a little more intentional about what we're doing and where we want to go, it can make a huge difference. And that's really why I want to get this podcast started, is folks that say, I'm okay trying to do something differently. I want to look at my housing costs and let me just start to think through this. And here's all these great case studies of folks that have done it, what they did right, what they did wrong, so they can be a little more intentional about it.
Yeah, one thing in there, you're going to learn about all the great things about it, and you're going to learn probably some of the horror stories. I don't know if they'll be on this podcast or if there'll be other ones, but you'll probably hear one or two, and that can be a detriment to some people, because they'll just cling on to anything risky of this, and they're probably the people that'll never do a house hack to begin with. But you have to have some acceptable level of risk, even if it, whatever probability that might happen.
Yeah, I think if you're going to get into any sort of real estate investing and house hacking, like you said, you're going to have those challenges. And every person we've been talking to at the interview, they always seem to run into some bigger bump. I mean, you had that one bad tenant and didn't pay for months on end, but you survived and you actually came out ahead financially. So yeah, definitely don't let that fear stop you from house hacking. All right, so the third question is, would you do it all over again if you could?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I knew that was going to be your answer. Awesome. All right, so before we let you go, this is the point in the show where we actually ask all of our guests a set of final 6 questions, and we like to call this
the Famous 6.
Are you ready for it?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So number 1, what is your favorite personal finance blog or book that you've read recently?
Recently, I reread Think and Grow Rich. There's a lot of good stuff. There's some crazy stuff, but for the most part, like, just a great book.
I love the Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. It's one of the first ones that went on my bookshelf and is still there, a decade plus later.
It's impressive.
All right, number 2, what is your favorite real estate related blog or book? And I'll sort of let you give me 2 parts to this, because I feel like number 1 might be Bigger Pockets.
Yeah, I mean, that's what first got me into it, and I've been less into Bigger Pockets now, but from initial information, man, they have the story of everybody in there, and any reason, anything that's been done, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're kind of the go-to. On a book, there's probably 2 of them. The initial one, I think it was Scott Trench that did Set for Life, where he almost talks through your concepts in a kind of the house hack of how to do this. That was a really good one that, depending on what phase that you're in, can be a really good one. If you can start that off, that would be a good one. And then recently I've been into more lease option books, and there's like Joe McCall or Chris Crone that have done some books. Yeah,
wonderful. I actually bought Scott Trench's book right when it came out. I think it was a wonderful book and aligned exactly with my thinking on it. So you're actually the first person to mention that one for our season 1 of the show. So I'm glad you brought it up, and I'll include a link in our show notes for folks that want to go check that out. All right, so on to number 3. What's been your favorite travel destination so far?
When I was in high school, went to Rome. That was phenomenal. Florence, Venice, Assisi. My wife and I have plans, 5-year anniversary. Not sure if we're going to go back there, but next year probably go somewhere abroad or maybe south.
Very cool. So how'd you actually like Assisi? One of the first times I went to Italy, that was one of the small places that we stopped. What was your impressions on it?
It was beautiful, and I couldn't believe. So we're sitting here, so you can't tell, but I'm 6'6". Back then, for like seeing like Francis of Assisi's house, like where they were like 4 foot walking underneath doors, I felt like a giant. And there's the Hobbit or Lord Pick Your Poison, but man, I could not believe that people were 4 feet tall back in the day.
Yeah, I was really glad I went. I don't know if you had heard, but there's an earthquake in Italy several years ago, and that big cathedral there on the square was actually, a lot of it got demolished. So I hate that that happened, but I also feel glad that I was able to see it before it had that damage.
Didn't know that either. Cool.
All right, so number 4. So what's next on your travel vacation list? You sort of alluded to that with your 5-year anniversary coming up. What's on the list? If you don't do Italy, what else is going to be on there?
With 2 young kids, you have to get creative. You don't go very far when you have a 3-month-old at home.
Yep.
Or far planned. So it's like if you can get away to the cabin, if you can get to grandparents or do something that's kind of big, but now we're planning out a year where we might do an all-inclusive resort in the Caribbean or something next September when it's our 5-year anniversary, because we've never done something like that, and I think it'd be cool.
Oh, ping me when you start planning that. My wife and I have gone to a couple in the past 2 or 3 years, and there's some we've liked and some we've really, really liked, and then 1 or 2 we might avoid. So I'm happy to give you some recommendations on those.
That'd be great, Andrew.
Awesome. And then number 5, what is the biggest bucket list item that you haven't accomplished yet?
That I haven't accomplished yet is I want to be 100% self-sufficient as an entrepreneur.
That's a pretty good bucket list item to get to. And then number 6, what is your favorite life hack?
There's probably 2 of them. Number 1, I didn't realize that people can come out and wash your car or pick up your car and take it as an oil change where you're at.
That actually exists?
They will come out to your house and wash your car and bring 2 people, bring it back to the shop, give it an oil change, and drop it back off at your location. Blew my mind. Didn't know people did that. I was like, I am forever using you. Save me an hour of driving there, waiting in that dumb line, sitting in there, going inside. It's like a 3-hour deal. I was like, for my time, I don't care if you charge me double. That's like 3 hours of my life I never get back every 6 months. Very
cool. I did not know that was actually a thing, or at least they don't have it here in New Orleans.
Okay.
And you said there's 2 life hacks so if that's the first one, what's the second one?
The other one is a business one. So if you're buying a property in an LLC, you can get creative with seller credits. So I wanted to, for anybody that's buying properties, and I realize this is a house hacking one, but from, normally if it's $100,000 house, you probably can't ask much more for like $3,000 or $4,000 back as a residential loan. If you buy it within an LLC and you get the right bank, you can get really creative. So what we do is we buy the house for $110,000 and ask for $12,000 or $13,000 back, so that our down payment doesn't have to be so high.
Yeah, you basically mark up the property, and then as long as you hit your appraised value, it's there. And what Adam was alluding to, for the folks that sort of missed that, if you do a conventional loan, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA loan, they limit the amount of concessions that you have. I can't remember off the top of my head what the percentage is, but they only let you have so much of a concession. So if you get that sort of bank that's lending to your LLC, I think that's a really cool business hack. And I've done that on some of my properties, where you basically mark it up, or instead of negotiating down further in the price, you basically take a concession, so you have to bring less cash to closing.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Adam, thank you so much for being on the show. It was great talking with you. I loved your accidental house hack story and how it turned into you now building this real estate empire. I think it was really, really cool. So thank you for sharing it.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It was fun talking about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for listening to our show. We really hope you've been enjoying it. Be sure to hit us up on Instagram or Facebook with your feedback. And there's 2 ways you can really help support the show. The first is to hit the subscribe button. So as soon as you're done with this episode, hit that subscribe button on your preferred podcast platform. That'll make sure you get every single episode as soon as it airs. And then the second thing you can do is leave a written review of the show and share the show with someone that wants to reduce their housing costs. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the House Hacking Podcast. For more up-to-date information on house hacking, to access links and resources mentioned in today's show, and connect with a guest and host, head over to www.fibrei.com. That's www.fibrei.com, where your house hacking journey begins.